Good morning. This is Dr. David A. Padgett. Today is Monday, March the 22nd. This is Geography 1010, Section 98A, and this is the Spring 2021 semester. Going to start my screen share and get right into today's class materials. So I just want to start out with maybe a couple of housekeeping statements. As you all are aware, I have now released the midterm grades, but don't be confused. I know there was some confusion. Some of you assumed that your Unit A exam grade was or is your midterm grade. That's not true. The Unit A exam grade is just the grade for that exam, period. You have other assignments that I assume you've been working on that will count towards your cumulative score. Now, if you are able to go to my TSU and look there. Now, in my TSU, I don't have a student view option the way that I do here. But if you go to my TSU and navigate to where your grades are, you should see an option for midterm grades. The midterm grade is your letter grade at the moment for the entire class. So most of you all are doing okay in here. You either have A, B, or C. If you have any grade lower than that, you need to get in touch with me immediately or just start doing work that would serve to improve your letter grade in here. Speaking of assignments, I'm going to move on first to take a look at a few of the article reviews from some of your classmates. So I noticed that things picked up last week. I see now we had 14 people turn in article reviews. Keep that up. Even if you're just getting started, this week, which is article review 4 is not due until 11:30 p.m. this evening. And then there's a grace period after that. So there's really no excuse. Just get these article reviews done. Let's take a look at some of them to see how we're doing. I was hoping that after the first couple of weeks and I made some comments that you would get a better idea of what is expected. So I'm going to stop my share for just a moment and see if I can find some article reviews from last week. A lot of you all turned them in. It's good. Let's see here. Take a look at this one. Okay, since Weaver is here, take a look at Weaver's article number 3. So I'm going to resume my screen share. Okay, so Weaver is a political science major, and notice that she has her article number, name, date, major here. Good. Summarizes the article. Let's see, the article is about, neighborhoods with Martin Luther King streets are poorer than the national average. This is interesting. I know someone, I guess that should be January 2021. But this is an article that someone I know would be interested in. But anyway, so She summarizes the article. Oh, this is very good. Not everybody would us know that MLK stands for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She clearly makes note of that, does not assume she's writing this essay to me, because obviously I would know that, but not everybody's going to know that. Um, Summarize the article. Very interesting article. I might even read it. She has a citation here. And then she found an internship opportunity on Tiger Track. The only thing that I would add would be the link here to the internship opportunity so that others or yourself could go back and find it. Then she has a textbook reference. Okay, good. Discusses ethnic distribution in the United States, chapter 12, figure 12.9. And the keywords here. Now, the only keyword I would add would be Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. streets. That would nail it down to a very specific sector of articles. When you when you list your keywords, think about what keywords you would use to find more articles about Dr. Martin Luther King streets. And so that would solidify this. If you typed ethnic region areas United States, you're going to get millions and who knows, billions of articles with those keywords. So you just want to narrow it down a little bit further so that you can speak to the specific theme and subject matter of this particular article. But overall, very well done article review there. I'm going to stop my share and go in and try to find another article review that we can take a look at. We're off to a good start. Like I said, keep up the good work, keep turning in these article reviews, and everything will be fine. Now let's look at Marshall's here. Let's see, Marshall. Okay, I'm going to resume my screen share. Seems as if you all are getting the hang of this. Okay, so here's Marshall's Article 3, liberal arts major, mapping out the most sung about you. It's a very interesting article. Music and geography here, very interesting article. We had an example of the cultural diffusion of music throughout the United States, beginning with the its southern roots in New Orleans. And so that was a topic in our last week's lecture, and also for this week's quiz. Should pay attention to that. So, okay, she gets very good, very detailed, very detailed essay, very well done here. And then she also has a citation, of course, right there at the beginning. Textbook reference, keywords, music, culture, very good keywords, very good keywords here. Again, the only thing that is missing is discussion on how this article is related to Miss Marshall's major, and also obviously a link to a career opportunity or scholarship opportunity from Tiger Track or some other source. Other than that, very well done. So that's Tyra Marshall's article number 3. I'm just going to stop my share again. Find another student's work to evaluate. Let's do one more, and then that'll be it. Fine. Let's see. No. Let's see. Here's one. Let's see. Go back again. Well, let's take a look at this one. Okay, I'm going to go back and share my screen. Okay, so here's Acacia Hicks's article review. And again, the only thing that's missing here is the major. She has her name, article 3. Need to have the major here. So it says she has thinking geographically, the interdisciplinary space between graphic design and cultural geography. And so it says articles related to her career choice. Okay, here it is. She's a graphic design major. So that article does fit. Then she has a quote from the Bradshaw text, but again, I would like to have the paragraph and page number, even though this is a good, very good choice for a textbook reference because it does connect back to the article. Then she does have a link from Tiger Track or Handshake. Yeah, the only thing I would say here is that this is okay in terms of content. In terms of organization, it's kind of hard to read. It's a little bit hard to read. But in terms of content, good keywords. I would like for the essay or the summary of the article to be a little bit longer than this, but this is satisfactory. I guess looks like Miss Hicks might have rushed it a bit to get it done, but done reasonably well. So I'm going to stop my share. Hopefully, you all made note of what I'm looking for in terms of the article reviews. Make sure that you do them. Again, they're a major portion of your grade, and so I am hoping that you will take advantage of that opportunity. These will probably be the easiest points you'll get in this class. Okay, so I'm going to stop my share and take care of one last piece of housekeeping, and then we will get into this week's lecture. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my screen share. So if you notice this week, you have the Unit B Research Quiz 2. And so the Unit B Research Quiz 2 is here. I'm going to go in and make it visible. I don't know if it's visible to you all yet. It's not. Make visible to users. Okay, so now I'm going to go to student view to make sure that I see what you all are seeing. Okay, so here is the Unit B research quiz. Here. Here's the quiz. Here's the answer sheet. And so this is just like the first quiz. Here are the instructions. Make sure you carefully read these instructions. If you have any questions, let me know. And of course, along with the quiz, you have the answer sheet. And so as I've described again, or described earlier, you will, you will on this answer sheet, put in the letter that you think is the correct answer. Your explanation should be very thorough. Okay. Don't just put, I was listening, don't just put, say, Dr. Padgett's lecture on March 3rd or whatever. You should have to be very detailed, timestamps. What did Dr. Padgett say? Don't assume that this is for me. It's for a general audience, people who don't know who Dr. Padgett is. What would you want to know if you wanted to find what you said you did to answer the question? Reference source, again, be very specific. Down to the page number, paragraph, timestamp, exact reference, what have you. In last week's lecture, I provided some really good examples of what I would expect in terms of responses to the quiz. So go back, take a look at that. If you have any questions, please ask. Some people have been doing a good job of asking questions about the quiz. I would strongly advise that if you have any confusion, okay? So, so that is the quiz. The quiz is due on Friday at 11 o'clock in the morning. So move forward with working on it as soon as possible. Again, you're going to use content from Unit B, which includes these lecture recordings on the human geography of North America. So you have a lecture recording there, a lecture recording there. You have a lecture recording here, all about the human geography of North America, and obviously the reading assignment for the human geography of North America. Those are some of your information sources, okay? Okay, so what we're going to do next is get into Unit C. And so Unit C, we'll prepare you for next week's quiz. And for Unit C, you will focus upon Chapter 2 again, which is population geography. And also we're getting into Chapter 11, pages 287 to 296. But in order to, so let's take a look at some of the data. So I have here the 2020 Population Reference Bureau data sheet. And so let's get into that. This is a very good resource. Now, you'll immediately see a few differences between the North American demographics and Latin American demographics right away. So let's look at some of the indicators in the population reference bureau sheet. So here's Latin America and the Caribbean. And so we can do a direct comparison. If we look at rate, let's look at the crude birth rate versus crude death rate. You'll immediately see some differences here. Okay, so if we look at North America, overall, for Canada and the United States, we have about 11 births per thousand people and 8 deaths per thousand people. Okay, so 11 per 1,000 birth rate, 8 per 1,000 death rate. Okay, let's look at Latin America. Now, for Latin America overall, the birth rate is 16, so it's higher, and the death rate is lower. So what should immediately jump out to you is that there's a higher overall growth rate in Latin America and the Caribbean, just in general. And so if we look at now, one thing that might confuse you a bit is, well, wait a minute. You probably can understand the birth rate being higher in Latin America. Part of the influence for that is culture. And so the reason that Latin America is called Latin America is because the dominant religion is Catholicism. And Catholicism's language is Latin, or Latin is the language of the Catholic faith in general. And we know in general that Catholics frown upon interfering with the procreation process, however you want to define that. They're anti-abortion. Some more conservative Catholics are even anti-birth control. You're very conservative. And so we can see why there's a higher birth rate per thousand people. But you might think, well, gee, how can they have a lower death rate? How is that possible? You would think that with all the advancements in medicine and all the hospitals we have and the availability of medical care that we have in this country compared to other countries, that certainly we would have a higher or a lower death rate here than places in Latin America. And if you scroll through, you'll notice that the death rates are 5, 6, 4 per thousand. Very rarely do we have countries that have death rates that are equal or higher. But the resource that we should look to now in order to answer this question is the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency World Factbook. Okay, and so we go we can go back to population structures. So if you notice for the United States, here's the population pyramid for the United States, for example, and you notice that we have a lot of people, a significant portion of people here in these older age categories. Once we get above 60 years of age, people are living relatively long lives, right? So we have a significant portion of the population is older. Let's take a look at a country somewhere. Let's look at a country in Latin America. Let's look at Honduras. And we're going to see something quite different, perhaps. We go to Honduras and let's look at Honduras's population pyramid. Notice this is a very different population structure than we have here. Notice that when we get into these older age groups, we don't see as many people. Not as many people here in these older age groups. Where do we see the bulk of the population? 5 years old, 5 to 9 years of age, 10 to 14 years of age. It looks like the largest age cohort is 15 to 19. And this portion of the population that's 20 years of age or younger is probably half the population, if not more. That's not the same in our country. So therefore, if there's a younger population in Honduras and in many other Latin American countries, younger people tend not to die as often as older people, perhaps in infancy. But once we see younger people um, in as a proportion of the population, you can clearly see that they don't. I mean, we saw that with COVID-19. Your immune system is better, you're healthier, um, and so with the United States having an older population, those older individuals have a higher death rate. And again, we saw that with COVID-19. In fact, the death rate for people over the age of 65 with COVID-19 was 80%. And so that made for a very dangerous situation, continually dangerous situation. But that's being abated now with the vaccinations, thankfully. So let's go back to the world population data sheet, takes another look at some of the data. Let's look at rate of natural increase in the United States and Canada versus Latin America and the Caribbean. So Canada, 0.2% rate of natural increase. The United States of America, 0.3%. If we look at Latin America as a whole, it's 1%. And again, what that means is that the population of Latin America and the Caribbean in general is going to double in 70 years. Now that, all things being equal. Now that doesn't seem as if, that seems like it's a long time. That's not a lot of time to have twice as many people in an area. And that's on average. If we look at Belize, for example, or we take a look at Guatemala, we see some of those countries have relatively high um, rates of natural increase, which means that, say, for example, with Guatemala, if we were to um, take 70 and divide it by 1.7%, the doubling time for Guatemala is about 41 years. That's not a lot of time to have twice as much water, twice as much housing, twice as much food, twice as many hospitals, twice as much everything. That's not a lot of time. And so you can clearly see some differences there. If we continue to cross compare, when we get the fertility rate, we see again that the United States and Canada, we are at zero, we're really below zero population growth. Our total fertility rate for the United States is 1.7. That means that the average woman between the ages of 15 and 45 has 1.7 children on average, right? That is below 2.1, which is zero population growth. So we are a very slow growing population. For the most part, if we look at Central America, Latin America, and the Caribbean overall is right at the replacement level. However, if we look at Central America, it's a little bit higher. Some of the countries, Guatemala, again, 2.7 children per woman, and still on a global scale, that's relatively low. If we go back and look at some of the countries on the African continent, we see the fertility rates are as high as 5.36. Somalia is 6. That means the average woman in Somalia has 6 children. That's average. Okay. Uganda, it's 5. Angola, 6.1. Democratic Republic of the Congo, 6.2. So even though the fertility rates for Latin America and the Caribbean are slightly higher than we have here in the United States. They're not the highest, okay, in the world. So just wanted to give you a frame of reference to see where our fertility rates versus Latin America's fertility rates fall on a global scale. Okay. Um, if we continue look at total fertility rates, they range up around 2, 1.9, 1.5, so on and so forth. And then you can look at age distribution, and then there's a whole column on family planning among, let's say, married women, but I guess if we just said women in general, that notice that there is a difference. Notice that in the United States and Canada, we have a very high percentage of women that have access to birth control. But when we get into some countries in Latin America, that number can drop to 51% in Belize, 51% in Panama, and so on and so forth. 34% in Haiti. And so that, of course, will lead directly to higher fertility rates if there's less access to birth control for women. So when we start to look at the population geography of Latin America and the Caribbean, we see some significant differences right away. But I want us to take a look at this presentation, Exploring Global Cities. So I'm going to kind of get through as much of this as I can today. Okay, just trying to get started here. Okay, here we go. So when we look at this issue of population geography, one of the things that we want to do again is make comparisons between where we are. Now, if you remember, when we looked at our population here, we're a very urbanized population. We've been urbanized, we mean the United States, we've been highly urbanized for quite some time. Not every place in the world has been like that. And so when we start to look at what's happened here globally, the world is becoming increasingly urbanized. In fact, only within recent years have we, meaning the world's population, moved to a situation where the majority of the world's population, say just over 50%, just over 50%. So if you look at the 2015 column here for the world, just over 50% of the world's population is now urban. So this urbanizing, this move towards cities growing larger is fairly recent. And so there are a lot of issues that come along with that, because urbanization in our country is very different than urbanization in other parts of the world, including Latin America and the Caribbean. So I probably need to update this chart, but you can see that some of the largest cities in the world are in Latin America. Here's Sao Paulo, Brazil, over 20 million people. Mexico City's over 20 million. Buenos Aires, Argentina is probably over 14 million by now at least. And so you have these very large cities throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. But again, as this article depicts, for the first time in world history, we now have a majority urban population, but that does not come without problems, because as it says here, approximately 1/6 of the world's population lives in slums. These are areas of slums. They have other names, as I'll show you in a moment, have in common lack of clean water, uh, lack of sanitation, lack of housing, things that are really essential for survival in today's world. Uh, if I were to ask you, for example, if you were living in Nashville, Tennessee, well, some of you, if you were on campus, you'd be living in Nashville, Tennessee. And I was to ask you, well, when you get up in the morning, even if you don't drink tap water, I know some of you all don't drink tap water, but you shower in it, you bathe in it, you probably use it for cooking if you do cook. I don't know where else you're going to get water from. Well, I guess unless you're really, I mean, you might use bottled water for cooking. I don't know. But for the most part, we are using tap water for cooking and bathing. And I was to ask you, when you are on campus at Tennessee State University, what is your source of drinking water? You would correctly answer the Cumberland River, Dr. Padgett. And then if I was to ask you again, when you flush, where does that material go eventually? You would say the Cumberland River. So the same place that we get our drinking water here in Nashville is the same place where we get our drinking water here in Nashville is the same place where your human waste goes. Now that probably will disgust you on the onset, but fortunately in our country, we have an infrastructure in place that sanitizes that water before it gets to your tap and cleans it. I wouldn't say sanitizes it, but cleans it before we put it back into our drinking water source. We have a massive infrastructure of wastewater treatment facilities and drinking water sanitizing facilities that keep us safe. Is that true in other parts of the world? No, no. They have the same situation. They are bathing and perhaps drinking the same water where they release human waste. And you can imagine why that might be problematic in terms of health. And so it says here that 1.6 million urbanites die due to lack of clean water and sanitation. Millions of people, mostly children, die simply because they don't have what we have, right? Something that we probably don't even think about most of the time, and that's clean drinking water and sanitation. We really don't give it a second thought. We get up in the morning, turn on the spigot, the shower, don't have a second thought about that. We flush the toilet, we don't think, where is this going? We don't think about that. But the rest of the world, it's a problem. And so in cities and other parts of the world, this is what's being faced. And these are these slums, shanty towns, and in Latin America, they're called favelas. Um, those sections of the cities are growing the fastest. And so why is this happening? Well, we talked about internal migration in the United States. So internal migration happens everywhere. In the United States, our internal migration is urban to urban. If and when people move, they will move from one city to another city. They'll move from Los Angeles to Atlanta, or New York to Birmingham, or they'll move from Detroit to Tampa. We'll move from one city to another city here. That's almost all the time. In other parts of the world, as the world is becoming increasingly urban, the migration pattern is largely rural to urban. That is, people leaving rural areas and moving to urban areas. Well, what are some of the pull and push factors associated with those migratory patterns in, say, Latin America? Well, one of the push factors is related to the environment. If you go all the way to the bottom, we have deforestation and desertification. Well, deforestation, which is discussed in your textbook at length, and so you should look for that in your textbook. Deforestation is when human beings cut down trees at a rate faster than nature can replace them. Now, normally we would think of forests as being a renewable resource. We can grow more trees. But in the Caribbean and Latin America, there are tropical forests there. It's some of those trees are a couple of 100 years old and they're very large. It takes a long time to grow a big tropical forest tree like a mahogany tree or ebony tree. And so therefore, once that tree is cut down, there's no replacing it anytime soon. So it's almost as if people are mining trees. And so you might ask, well, why are people cutting down these trees like this? Well, it's for um, um, economic opportunity. A lot of the wood that is used in musical instruments is very valuable. It comes from tropical sources, and so or tropical forest areas, and so it's a very valuable commodity. And if later on we look at the economic geography of the region, a lot of these, many of these countries are not wealthy. The people are not wealthy, and they pretty much are in a position where they have to rely upon these various resources uh, to survive. So yeah, they'll cut down an endangered tropical forest tree to feed their family. Who wouldn't? Okay, it's either you or a tree survivor, and I think you're going to pick yourself and your family over a tree. Unfortunately, that results in a decimation of the forest, of the tropical forest. And once that happens, that takes away people's ability to engage in successful agricultural activities. And once you're not able to grow food, and understand this, in other parts of the world, there's something called subsistence agriculture, okay, where people grow what they eat in their garden. They don't go to Kroger, they're not going to Winn Dixie, there's no Publix. What you grow in your garden is what you eat, period. Now, what if people, for whatever reason, due to ruining the soil as a result of deforestation, and desertification. Desertification is actually when human beings ruin soil. It's not that the soil or the area literally turns into a desert. This is desertification is when human beings mismanage soil. Either they overgrow crops or overgraze, have too many animals out there. And desertification and deforestation go hand in hand. In many cases, after the trees are removed, the soil is unable to do anything else because Mother Nature, or whoever you want to call it, designed that soil to grow big trees, not corn, not cabbage. And so when human beings remove trees and then go in and say, well, we're going to plant crops or we're going to use this as grazing, that soil doesn't hold up very long. And eventually it's ruined. And now you have people literally unable to feed themselves. And so when that happens in rural areas, when people find themselves unable to feed themselves in rural areas, then they pretty much have to leave. So desertification and deforestation are push factors, and for people leaving rural areas to go find food, hopefully in an urban area. And global warming and climate change is just exacerbating the effects of deforestation and desertification. As climate change and global warming become more and more prominent, we start to see people um, in more and more desperate situations in rural areas being hungry, unable to feed their families, and then they will pick up stakes and migrate to the city, um, looking for food, or at least the opportunity to engage in economic activity that will allow them to buy food. Um, Now, there are pull factors that will draw people to cities. One, obviously, I just mentioned is economic opportunity. And even then, there's no guarantee. A lot of us in this country become very concerned if the unemployment rate gets up around 10%, 12%, right? But what does that really mean? If the unemployment rate is 10%, that means that 90% of people are employed. Is that really that bad? It is in terms of the way our economy functions. But in other parts of the world, the unemployment rate can be 20%, 30%, 50% in some cases. Very high rates of unemployment. And so even if people wind up in cities thinking that they might have a chance to improve themselves economically, that doesn't mean that chance is going to be there. And they have to devise creative ways of making money that hopefully are legal. And so, a lot of us, when we look at our neighborhoods, well, let's just be real. I'm talking about Black neighborhoods, and we don't have grocery stores, and we don't have restaurants, and we don't have this, and we don't have that. Um, and it's not just African Americans. Uh, But when we look at people from other parts of the world, particularly Latin America, and we see them come here with very little, and the next thing you know, they're building a grocery store in their neighborhood. They've got uh, whatever in their neighborhood. And we think that there's some advantage that they have above us that is provided by the government that helps these people out. But that's not really it. It's a mindset. Our mindset is I'm going to get an education or I'm going to acquire a skill so I can go and work for this company or that company or this government agency or so on and so forth. But if you're in a situation such as people in Guatemala or Honduras where there are no jobs, okay, you have to create your own job. And so when people with that mindset come to this country, and let's say there's no grocery store in the neighborhood, they don't say, "Oh, what are we going to do?" They put their heads together, create their own grocery store, create their own um community center or what have you, without relying upon anyone, because that's the reality of the places where they come from. That's their reality. And they're not going to change as soon as they get here and start looking for jobs as the only way of becoming economically successful. But yet and still, when these uh, migrants travel to cities in Latin America and in Sao Paulo and in Rio and Mexico City, uh, they oftentimes wind up living in favelas and unplanned settlements without any of the amenities that you would expect to have in a city, such as housing, electricity, clean water, sanitation. When that happens, when human population exceeds the capacity of a city to support that human population, that's called over urbanization. So over urbanization is simply when there are too many people for a city to support. Not enough housing, not enough water, not enough of anything. And people end up in these unplanned settlements and favelas and slums. What we have in our country is something called sprawl. We have too much development, too much pavement, too many buildings, squeezing out the natural land cover, resulting in flood risk increase and other problems. Um, Speaking of health, I'm talking about public health here, the next bullet. In our country, we have medical clinics, we have clinics in our grocery stores, right? We have a lot of access to healthcare in this country. Not true in other parts of the world. So if a family's in a rural area and the child falls ill, uh, that family might have to move. and travel hundreds of miles just to get to a clinic, not a hospital, just a clinic where there might be one physician who doesn't have a whole lot of supplies and some training who may or may not be able to help that child or whoever is sick. So another pull factor for rural to urban migration is to get access to medical care that might not exist in the rural area. So all of these issues contribute to this, I guess, crisis of crowding and poor health in cities throughout the world, but specifically in Latin America. Here is a favela in Brazil. So notice that the homes are constructed out of whatever people can find. I mean, people build these homes themselves. They don't go to a realtor. Notice the structures are built up into the hills. So the topography of Latin America is very, very hilly, mountainous. The majority of Latin America's population lives at elevations of 2,000 feet above sea level, right? That's where people live. And notice that these people that live up in the hills are poor people. This is the exact opposite of what we find here. In our country, in the United States, the more wealthy people live up in the hills, and the poor people live down in the bottoms, the low areas, the areas that frequently flood or are infested by pests like mosquitoes and rats. It's the exact opposite. When we start to look at the physical geography of Latin America and the Caribbean, you'll notice that they get a significantly higher amount of rain and precipitation in general. They're also visited by hurricanes and other tropical storms. So you can only imagine what's going to happen or what would happen if there was a storm that struck here. There would be a landslide, mudslide, people would be killed. And that happens all the time in Latin America and the Caribbean. People killed as a result of a landslide that comes with a hurricane or a rainstorm. Happens very frequently. Now this is not in Latin America or the Caribbean, but this is just an example of a shanty town or an unplanned settlement. Again, people living in substandard housing. And again, this is happening all over the world. This water here, who knows what's in it? You can see all the trash, and you might ask, well, don't these people care about their community? There's no trash collection here. No garbage truck's going to come rolling through here and pick up the trash. And if you look at some of these houses might not even be 300 square feet, may or may not have furniture in them. There might be 7 or 8 people or more living in some of these small, what we would call shacks. Okay, multi-generations of families living in these shacks, not just this gentleman sitting here. He might be one of 10 people that's living inside of this very small shack that you can clearly see was built by himself and maybe his relatives. So we have a very different urban landscape. And I think what I'll do is pick it up with this slide on Wednesday. But if you just take a look at the lack of access to water and what people have to do to get water in places like Mexico City might be quite shocking to you. So I'm going to end today's lecture here. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Continue working on the quiz. Now remember the quiz, well, I guess it should be pretty obvious. The quiz for this week is for Unit B. Okay, these lectures are Unit C, so I'm getting you prepared for next week's quizzes, but you should be working on Quiz B this week, looking at the recorded lectures and asking questions. So again, I'm going to stop recording. Thank you for watching this recording. Hopefully you will have been watching these recordings. And I will see you all on Wednesday.